as it was the first time that any naval air service had ever carried out such an effort. 25. The campaign initially began in 1937, taking place largely in the Yangtze River Basin, with attacks on military installations along the Chinese coast by Japanese carrier aircraft. 25. Naval involvement reached its peak in 1938-39 with ferocious bombardment of cities deep in the Chinese interior by land-based medium bombers, and concluded during 1941 with an attempt by tactical aircraft, both carrier and land-based, to cut communication and transportation routes in southern China. Although the 1937-41 air offensives failed in its political and psychological aims, it did reduce the flow of strategic material to China and for a time improved the Japanese military situation in the central and southern parts of the country. 25. The China War was of great importance and value to the Japanese naval aviation in demonstrating how aircraft could contribute to the projection of naval power ashore. 26. Despite the fierce rivalry between the military branches, in the fall of 1937 General Matsui Iwan, the Army General in command of the theater, admitted the superiority of the naval air services. His combat troops relied on the Navy for air support. 27. Naval bombers such as the Mitsubishi G3M and Mitsubishi G4M were used to bomb Chinese cities. Japanese fighter planes, notably the Mitsubishi Zero, gaining tactical air superiority. Control of the skies over China belonged to the Japanese. Unlike other naval air forces, the Ijnas was responsible for strategic bombing and operated long-ranged bombers. The Japanese strategic bombing was mostly done against Chinese big cities, such as Shanghai, Wuhan and Chongqing, with around 5,000 raids from February 1938 to August 1943. The bombing of Nanjing and Guangzhou, which began on the 22nd and the 23rd of September 1937, called forth widespread protests, culminating in a resolution by the Far Eastern Advisory Committee of the League of Nations. Lord Cranborne, the British Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, expressed his indignation in his own declaration. Words cannot express the feelings of profound horror with which the news of these raids have been received by the whole civilized world. They are often directed against places far from the actual area of hostilities. The military objective, where it exists, seems to take a completely second place. The main object seems to be to inspire terror by the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians. 28. Pacific War. First Air Fleet AHED-3 A dive bombers preparing to bomb American naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter aircraft and other aircraft preparing for takeoff on the aircraft carrier Shikoku on the 7th of December, 1941. Fourth attack on Pearl Harbor. At the beginning of the Pacific War, the Imperial Japanese Navy possessed the most powerful carrier force in the world. Through a combination of excellent ships, well-designed aircraft, and unsurpassed aviators. 29. The Navy Air Service consisted of 5 naval air fleets. The Japanese had a total of 10 aircraft carriers, 6 fleet carriers, 3 smaller carriers, and 1 training carrier. The 11th Air Fleet contained most of the Navy's land-based strike aircraft. One important advantage exercised by the Japanese at the start of the war was their ability to mass carrier air power. In April 1941 the first Air Fleet was created, concentrating the Navy's carriers into a single powerful striking unit. 30. The Kido Butai, Mobile Unit Forward/Force, was the first Air Fleet's operational component. At the start of the war, 3 carrier divisions made up Kido Butai. 31. Unlike in the United States Navy, where carrier divisions served only in an administrative capacity, the carrier divisions of the Kido Butai were operational entities. The 2 carriers in a division fought together, often exchanging aircraft squadrons and commanders on strikes. The commander of the Kido Butai could wield the aircraft of its 3 divisions as a single entity, bringing masses of aircraft crewed by highly trained aviators onto a single target. 31. During the first 6 months of the war, Japanese naval air power achieved spectacular success and spearheaded offensive operations against Allied forces. 32. On the 7th of December, 1941, the IJN's Kido Butai attacked Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet by destroying over 188 aircraft at the cost of 29 aircraft. On 10 December, Japanese naval land-based bombers operating from bases in Indochina were also responsible for the sinkings of HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulsohic. Was the first time that capital ships were sunk by aerial attack while underway. 33. In April 1942, the Indian Ocean raid drove the Royal Navy from Southeast Asia. 34. There were also air raids carried out on the Philippines and Darwin in northern Australia. In these battles, the Japanese veterans of the Chinese War did well against inexperienced Allied pilots flying obsolete aircraft. However, their advantage did not last. In the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway, and again in the Guadalcanal campaign, the Japanese lost many veteran pilots. Because the early production G4M1S of Kanoyak with the original shape tail cones. A formation of Japanese bombers taking anti-aircraft fire, seen from the Australian cruiser HMAS Hobart. Japanese pilot training program was unable to increase its production rate. Those veterans could not be replaced. 35. Meanwhile, the American pilot training program went from strength to strength. The American aircraft industry rapidly increased production rates of new designs that rendered their Japanese opponents obsolescent. Examination of crashed or captured Japanese aircraft revealed that they achieved their superior range and maneuverability by doing without cockpit armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. Flight tests showed that they lost maneuverability at high speeds. American pilots were trained to take advantage of these weaknesses. The outdated Japanese aircraft and poorly trained pilots suffered great losses in any air combat for the rest of the war, particularly in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In the Battle of Leyte Gulf a few months later, the 1st Air Fleet was used only as a decoy force to draw the main American fleet away from Leyte. The remnants of Japanese naval aviation were then limited to land-based operations, increasingly characterized by kamikaze attacks on American invasion fleets. From the 16th of December, 1941 to the 20th of March, 1945, a formation of Japanese bombers. Officer, or experienced chief petty officer. Early production G4M1S of Kanoyak with the original shape tail cones. A formation of Japanese bombers taking anti-aircraft fire, seen from the Australian cruiser HMAS Hobart. Japanese pilot training program was unable to increase its production rate. Those veterans could not be replaced. 35. Meanwhile, the American pilot training program went from strength to strength. The American aircraft industry rapidly increased production rates of new designs that rendered their Japanese opponents obsolescent. Examination of crashed or captured Japanese aircraft revealed that they achieved their superior range and maneuverability by doing without cockpit armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. Flight tests showed that they lost maneuverability at high speeds. American pilots were trained to take advantage of these weaknesses. The outdated Japanese aircraft and poorly trained pilots suffered great losses in any air combat for the rest of the war, particularly in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In the Battle of Leyte Gulf a few months later, the First Air Fleet was used only as a decoy force to draw the main American fleet away from Leyte. The remnants of Japanese naval aviation were then limited to land-based operations, increasingly characterized by kamikaze attacks on American invasion fleets. From the 16th of December 1941 to the 20th of March 1945, IJN aviation casualties killed were 14,242 aircrew and 1,579 officers. Aircraft strength 1941. The IJNs had over 3,089 aircraft in 1941 and 370 trainers. 1,830 first-line aircraft including 660 fighters, including 350 Mitsubishi Zeros, 36. 330 carrier-based strike aircraft. 240 land-based, twin-engined bombers. 520 seaplanes, includes fighters and reconnaissance, and flying boats. Organization. The elite of the pilots were the carrier-based air groups, KTI, later called Koku Sentai, whose size, from a handful to 80 or 90 aircraft, was dependent on both the mission and type of aircraft carrier that they were on. Fleet carriers had three types of aircraft: fighters, level forward/torpedo planes, and dive bombers. Small air carriers tended to have only two types, fighters and level forward/torpedo planes. The carrier-based KT numbered over 1,500 pilots and just as many aircraft at the beginning of the Pacific War. The IJN also maintained a shore-based system of naval air fleets called Koku Kantai and area air fleets called Homin Kantai, containing mostly twin-engine bombers and seaplanes. The senior command was the 11th Naval Air Fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Nishitsu Kahara. Land-based aircraft provided the bulk of Japan's naval aviation up to the eve of World War II. 37. Each naval air fleet contained one or more naval air flotillas, commanded by rear admirals, each with two or more naval air groups. Each naval air group consisted of a base unit and 12 to 36 aircraft, plus 4 to 12 aircraft in reserve. Each naval air group consisted of several squadrons, HIGTI, of 9, 12 or 16 aircraft. This was the main IJN Air Service combat unit and was equivalent to a squadron, SHUTEI, in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. Each HICOTEI was commanded by a lieutenant, J.G. warrant. Officer, or experienced chief petty officer, while most pilots were non-commissioned officers. There were usually 4 sections in each HICOTEI, each section, SHUTEI, with 3 or 4 aircraft. By mid-1944 it was common for a SHOTEI to have 4 aircraft. There were over 90 naval air groups at the start of the Pacific War, each assigned either a name or a number. The named naval air groups were usually linked to a particular Navy Air Command or a Navy base. They were usually numbered when they left Japan. See also. List of military aircraft of Japan. Imperial Japanese Navy Aviation Bureau. List of the 6M Rising operators. List of Japanese Navy Air Force aces, Mitsubishi A6M. List of radar models of the Imperial Japanese Navy. List of bombs used by the Imperial Japanese Navy. List of weapons on
Yes, let's stop. So the video's 3 parts.